Hello.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic.
Great. So NiCHE Conversations. I'm Jessica DeWitt. I'm one of the editors here at the network in Canadian History and Environment. And I'm joined by another one of our editors today, Isabelle Gapp. Do you want to tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a Arts and Science postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Art History at the University of Toronto, and I've been an editor with NiCHE for a year now. And we are and my research tellingly focuses on visual cultures of the circumpolar north.
Yes, which is what we're talking about
It
the
is.
entire time today. So, yeah, and this is your second time on NiCHE Conversations.
It is.
So
It's good to be
welcome
back.
back. You're the second person who's done two. I think our other Caroline Evans Abbott, who's in the audience today, I think, has also been a double guest. So, yeah, so we're talking about visual cultures of the circumpolar north. And thought we'd start off by talking about the working group that you're a part of this name. So, and some people might not understand what a working group is. Like, what does that mean? Yeah, tell us about it.
So we are a working group, as Jessica mentioned, at the University of Toronto. And essentially what that means that we are is we're a research group. We're a group of people interested in the circumpolar north, and we meet on a monthly basis to share our texts, videos, a lot of videos. We've sort of given up on the reading side of things for a little bit. And we all come from very different fields. So for context, we're just entering our second year. We're funded by the Jackman Humanities Institute at the University of Toronto that have a program of working groups that they support each year. And so we're really fortunate to be supported by them, especially going into our second year. We are a growing group, so we now have 20 members.
Wow.
Across different disciplines. I think we're across about 6 or so disciplines, from sort of art history, Indigenous visual cultures, architecture, geography. And we're not exclusive to the University of Toronto. So while we're headed out of the University of Toronto, led by myself, Mark Cheetham, who is my co-editor for the series, and even a DIDSTAR, a PhD candidate in the Department of Art History, we have members both at University of Toronto, Queen's University, we have members all the way in Florida states. So we operate as a very sort of hybrid group and not wanting to sort of restrict ourselves to the University of Toronto.
Cool. Yeah, it seems like a awesome group. Just from being an outsider looking in, you all are always doing really cool things and seem very supportive of each other and stuff. So
it's been really nice as well to kind of share some of what we've been thinking through the series and not sort of confining ourselves to just our own meetings.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a lot of interest in this topic from scholars and the public alike. So right now we have the first part of the series running. It's been running since August, and then we'll have part 2 in January, I believe.
Yeah, January and February.
Yeah, so big outpouring of scholarship and people who want to write and talk about this stuff. So I thought we'd talk about, when we're thinking about visual cultures of the circumpolar north, what are we talking about when we're talking about visual cultures? What does that mean? What are the kinds of art or objects, etc., that these scholars are looking at in the series?
Yeah, definitely. So like, as we went into the series, we sort of very much wrote that we sort of construed visual culture very broadly. We didn't want people from non-art historical or visual culture backgrounds to be put off by the idea, well, only art historians can write about this. It was very much sort of saying, well, no, there are, we want to encourage ways of engaging with visual material, but from very interdisciplinary perspectives. So I think what's been really exciting for us, especially with the first part of this series, is just how diverse the responses have been to our call. We weren't, I focus primarily on landscape painting from sort of Canada and the Nordic regions, and my co-editor Mark very much engages with sort of print cultures from the Anglosphere. And so we had very different backgrounds coming into this, and sort of what we expected to see was we had no idea what we were expecting to see. It was such a broad call, both sort of thematically, materially. The circumpolar north is a very broad geographical framework as well. So when we're looking at, when we say circumpolar north as well, we're looking at anything from Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, the Nordic countries, Russia. And so when you've got that broad geography, broad thematic focus, and a broad temporal focus, we were really not sure what to expect. And I think, the first part of this series, our 8th post just went live today, and we have one post left next week. They're all very different. None of them are the same. We started with a post, The Arrival of the Harmony by Jonathan Westaway, which focused on archival photography. But we've had pieces, sort of Bart Pushaw's sort of focus on these walrus tusks, painted walrus tusks, and Sarah Pickman's piece on Puck magazine and sort of these polar exploration illustrations. And then we've had also artist responses, and sort of more personal, intimate responses. Yandong Lee's was a piece following a photograph he took during his undergraduate degree, and sort of it struck a chord, whilst Pat Naldi's piece is of her own photography. So, it was very, when we say visual cultures, it really is very broadly construed. It encompasses both sort of material responses, visual responses, textual responses. I think, perhaps one of the pieces that sort of pushed some of our authors out of their comfort zones was maybe Matt Farish, who's a geographer, and sort of asking him to focus on this sort of one photograph that he came up with. And so it's been both great for us, sort of having to think, okay, well, what we take for granted as art historians, others might not be so sort of, it's not as intuitive.
Yeah.
But it's been, I think our authors as well have enjoyed the challenge of thinking in the shorter format that NiCHE sort of facilitates, about how we center the object or the artwork or the photograph, in thinking about sort of broader ideas.
Yeah, I've really loved just witnessing this series unfold and seeing all the different ideas, ways, angles that people are approaching it. It really is really broad. And when I organize series for NiCHE, I like to do broad topics as well, because I think I just love to see the different things that people come up with, and the new contributors that will come to us, that haven't written about for us before, never thought of writing for us before, but they gravitate to this one particular topic that we're asking people to write about. But there is some challenges with connecting everyone when you have people coming in from so many different angles. Of course, they're connected by that singular kind of topic prompt. But I thought maybe we could talk about maybe some of the themes or topics, etc., like that are bringing all these posts together so far that you've witnessed or what have you.
Yeah, definitely. It was a really interesting question to think about, actually, because we took it for granted that, well, all of them respond to circumpolar north, so they're all inherently connected. Through that. It's taking care of itself. How are these pieces related? Well, they're all engaging with the circumpolar north. Done. But I think what's been so interesting is, and what's really exciting, is this turn towards archival material and sort of really digging through and finding pieces that are exciting, that authors really want to think about and haven't been thought about before. There's this underlying focus on the archive, which I think is just a really interesting way of thinking about the circumpolar north, especially when given the changes that are taking place, climate changes that are taking place in the circumpolar north. What does it mean to be turning to the archive as a way of thinking about the history of visual culture in the circumpolar north, but also sort of the present day kind of urgencies that we're sort of facing. And so, thinking about, I think Jonathan Westaway's piece was really interesting in that regard, that he used these archival imagery that had such, historic value. But in light of the pandemic over the last few years, they've taken on even more of an urgent meaning. And, I think sort of, Pat Naldi's piece really probes these images, these new images as an archive. The fact that, no sooner have you taken these photographs of ice than those landscapes don't exist anymore.
Yes.
And so I think that has sort of really, for me, stood out as a sort of a theme that I wasn't necessarily anticipating. And I think it shows a really interesting turn in sort of visual culture and art history towards using the archive in really interesting ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think that for me has been the really sort of standout piece, and I think that will be one of the strengths we see in the next parts as well. You know, so we have another 8 posts coming in part 2, and I think for us, what's been really rewarding about splitting up the call, you know, the series this way, is allowing us to maybe restructure or reorientate our own thinking about what this series is doing and is achieving as we go into part 2. Because obviously when we went into writing our introductory post, we had an idea of the posts we were going to be seeing over the coming weeks, but we hadn't yet received all of the essays. So it was in very many ways surprising for us. You know, we're going into this blind when we wrote our introductory post. You know, we have an idea of what we're going to see, but we're not completely sure. And so I think when we write our introductory post for part 2, it's going to be really interesting for Mark and I to reflect on, you know, what stood out, what, you know, just really answer this question that you've asked, Jessica, which is, you know, what are the underlying themes that have emerged? How are people thinking about the circumpolar north? You know, because as I said, you know, we know how we're thinking about it, but it's been really interesting, as you say, each week to see, you know, not only different materials and different geographies and different periods, but also how are people thinking about this sort of framing with regards to visual culture and art history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love that. And yeah, I loved Pat Naldy's point about photographs, and, you know, a photograph is immediately an archive. And, you know, my nostalgic side was like, oh, I felt it in my heart.
Well, and I don't want us to, you know, obviously we're speaking today with sort of 8 posts out of the way, and I don't want to leave Emma Rath's piece, which is coming out next week, sort of absent from this discussion. But I think Emma really ties together this archival idea. So it's her piece, not to give too much away, but her piece is focused on photographs in an archive and the archival role of the photograph. So I think it's going to tie the series together really nicely next week.
Very good. Well, I'm excited about that. Yeah, I think the circumpolar north is just like, it's so prevalent in our subconscious these days, but it also is a geographic region that not many of us you know, deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, and that's a lot to do with the way our media is structured and, you know, Western bias, etc. But just, you know, I really appreciate these opportunities to really think about that region, because I personally don't think about it very often, and I'm sure a lot of people don't. So yeah, I found it a very rewarding experience being on the readership side of this series, and I really love that you're bringing art history to NiCHE. We haven't had a lot of art history represented on the site, and it's just an example of how, you know, bringing in new and varied editors can really enrich our topics that we get to cover. So I want to thank you.
It's just to add, it's been really exciting for me, someone who's been thinking about the circumpolar north in the context of art history since, you know, the start of my PhD 5-6 years ago now, to see this kind of, to have been able to put out a call and have so many people respond to it so positively. And to be able to use NiCHE as a way to showcase this has been so great. Yeah,
it's really fun. It's fun stuff being a NiCHE editor. We'll have a call to be an editor next year, next month. Keep your eyes out. Yeah, but I want to thank you for putting this series together, you and Mark, and, you know, extend my congratulations to him as well. And yeah, I'm excited to see the post next week and what comes in January and February. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Okay. Take care, Isabelle.
Bye. You too.